Hello, and welcome to the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue on your social media feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, the author of the novel Brotherless Night.
So, some big news in the literary world. The winner for the Nobel Prize for Literature was just announced. Did you check all that out?
Of course not, Whitney. Why would I, as a literature professor, author, and co host of a literary podcast, have any idea about that?
Okay. All right, but I do want to know, be honest, had you read anything by the winner?
I hadn't. Had you?
No, I had not.
Well, I didn't know anything about his work, and some of the things that I did. There were a lot of publications that had published some of his short fiction, and I was able actually to find a piece of flash fiction, which I went and discussed with my undergraduate literature class, which was really fun and interesting. And was kind of
It's embarrassing to have to admit that. I feel like people know that László Krasznahorkai is a great writer, and somehow I just was not clued in on it.
yeah. I mean, he was pretty high. He was pretty high profile in the U.S. even before winning. Like there was a Times profile of him back in 2014, and still like the world of reading is big. So I'm always glad to have the Nobel kind of point me in the right direction. But yeah, I had not read, for example, Herscht 07769, one of his best known recent novels.
Which is
Uh,
great, by the way, now that we've had a chance to read some of his work. And also, I mean, his work does really link up with a lot of stuff that we've been talking about on the show because he's from Hungary. His work is, related to the politics of Viktor Orbán, who is a big authoritarian dude that our current president likes and is going to go visit. So, I mean, it would be
well,
nice to have somebody explain this to us.
Well, worry not, Whitney. Today we have Ottilie Mulzet, the translator of Krasznahorkai's novels, here to teach us something about all of that. Ottilie is a literary critic and a Hungarian translator of poetry and prose based in Prague. She's written multiple scholarly essays on translating and the critical analysis of Hungarian literature. Her translations have received international appraisal and appear regularly at the literary journal Hungarian Literature Online. She received the 2014 Best Translated Book Award for her translation of László Krasznahorkai's Sabo There Below and the 2019 National Book Award for Translated Literature for Krasznahorkai's Baron Wenkheim's Homecoming. Most recently, she translated his Herscht 07769. Ottilie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, this is just for background. By the way, I think this is the first time we've had a translator on the show, so we're excited to welcome you here. Suki has been wanting to do this for a long time. So, this is her dream come true. Maybe you could just talk to us about how you got started working as a translator and then how you got hooked up with Laszlo.
Well, actually, I probably started translating about 30 years ago. I'd spent an amount of time intensively studying Hungarian. I'm actually not a native speaker. I was born in Canada, so my native language is actually English. And I became aware of Krasznahorkai's work, I would say in the late 90s, probably with his novel Háború és háború, War and War. I started reading it in Hungarian at that time. Also at that time, I moved to Prague, where I've been living ever since, towards the late 90s. So that was very good in that I was able to begin traveling to Hungary much more frequently. And I just became much more familiar with the scene in contemporary Hungarian literature. Before then, I had studied and had also translated for myself a lot of the classics, especially a lot of the early 20th century literature and the interwar writers who are extremely important as well. Um, and I was just became so enamored of Laszlo's work, actually. I attended there really, one thing about Hungary is that over the 20th century and even today, there are a number of literary institutions and sort of workshops, ateliers, not just for translators and for writers. There's a very strong tradition there. so translators are very important, that this also extends to translation. So I attended a couple of translation camps in the early millennium. At the time, it was called the Attila Translation Camp. It's now run by a different nonprofit in Hungary. And I think it was 2003. So Krasznahorkai was actually a guest. You know, they have writers come. It's wonderful because they have writers come and just talk about their work. He came and he actually read from his Japanese novella, A Mountain to the North. I really fell in love with it. And I just, having seen him in person, having heard him like take part in this discussion, I really became very enamored of his work, and I was just sort of reading it a lot. But my opportunity to first translate something came up in 2008 uh, when he published Seobo There Below in Hungarian. And I was connecting up with this online portal for Hungarian literature in English, Hungarian Literature Online. And I asked, there's a different set of editors there now, but I asked the editor if I could translate this one story from Seobo. She conferred with Krasznahorkai. He agreed. It went up in the internet. And then actually what was kind of nice is that the next year, because it was the 20th anniversary of 1989, which feels so long ago now, but The Guardian picked it up as one of their stories. They actually picked a story from each like former Eastern European country, or each, I don't know, country that where communism had fallen in 1989 or shortly thereafter. And after that, I translated Animal Inside, which was a kind of cahier or pamphlet or chapbook with beautiful paintings by Max Neumann. And that was published by the Sylph Editions, which is part of the American University in Paris. So after that, there was a question of who's going to translate Seobo. And at this point, because of course László had a previous translator, George Sirtash, who's a British poet, who his family immigrated to the UK after 1956, when I think he was still a very young boy. But by this point, George had translated 3 major novels, and he also has an oeuvre of his own as a poet. And I think at that point he had understandably felt that he could use maybe a little break. So he was happy. He was happy to have me working on Seobo. I did a sample chapter for Barbara at New Directions, and it just sort of went from there, basically. Yeah, so that's how I really began working with Laszlo. And then I think after that it was Destruction and Sorrow Under the Heavens for uh, Seagull books in Calcutta, and then The World Goes On, Baron Venkheim's Homecoming, and finally Herscht, which is the last one I've translated.
So Sugi and I've never talked to you about this, Sugi, but we've both had our work translated by a translator. I had a really good relationship with my French translator, for instance. It was really productive and interesting because I do speak French, so it's kind of cool to see your book in another language. Sugi, what was your relationship? Well, I want to ask both of you. I want to, first of all, you met Laszlo early on. So at what point do you work in person? Or are you working exclusively online? Do you get to see this guy? What's he like in person? You know, is he
Well,
funny?
actually,
Is he angry? Is he gruff? What is he like?
oh, he's incredibly funny. The thing about Laszlo is that, well, the thing is, I mean, I don't know if hopefully it comes through, but there's actually a lot of like one-liners and there's a lot of humor in his books. For example, when I was translating Herscht, I was laughing a lot as I was translating it. To me, a lot of parts of it were just absolutely hilarious. Um, but he's very funny, and it's really like a one-liner a minute almost. He's incredibly witty, actually. He's very, very funny. And just the way he uses Hungarian is just absolutely wonderful. Hungarian can be sort of like a very ironic language. And yeah, his just his Hungarian is just listening to him speak is wonderful. But yeah, I met him for the first time. Well, the first time I saw him was when I was at this translation camp. He was in Prague. He came, I think he was promoting Seobo. He came to the Hungarian Cultural Center. And I think by that point I had translated his story. So I met him then, and he signed my copy of Seobo. So that was like really the first time we met and spoke in person. And after that, we've tended to meet like off and on. Actually, the last time I saw him, he had a 70th birthday party in Budapest last year, which is a really lovely event. So I saw him there. And when I'm working on his book, sometimes we talk on the phone, or we talk on Skype, and it's no more Skype, or we talk through WhatsApp or something, or we message each other. So we're kind of like more or less constantly like in low key touch, I would say. And he's just like
That's,
seriously, he's a lovely, lovely person, really. And just, as I said, extremely funny.
I mean, Herscht is hilarious. It's funny that you say that his spoken that when you talk to him, he has a lot of one-liners. I mean, right?
We should say what
He's
the main conceit of Herscht is.
Ottilie, would you like to
Oh,
for our
sure,
listeners
sure.
who don't know Herscht?
Yeah, Herscht is actually very interesting because it's really his first novel that's set in Europe, but not set in Hungary. It's set in Erfurt, which is in former East Germany. And what's kind of interesting for me is that this whole area of East Germany, which he describes, is actually almost like just over the border from where I live. So if you go like north from Prague, it's like literally, I don't know, it's like an hour to Dresden. And that's basically this whole, like, there's one character in the book who's living in Dresden, and like she's complaining about how crap everything is there. So it's like the former East Germany. And I mean, a lot of the characters in the book are complaining about how they feel that everything is deprived and everything. But what's kind of funny is that, like, when you're driving or when you're coming from the Czech Republic, like compared to the Czech Republic, it seems really rich. Like automatically once you cross the border, the roads are better, the cars are better, everything is like much more repaired. And then you're crossing back into the Czech Republic, you suddenly just see all the like there are piles of ruins, the abandoned factories and everything. But anyway, the premise of this is all about the sort of like neo-Nazis in the former East Germany. And I guess everybody knows that the right fascist party AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, has done really well in the elections lately, and they're mainly based in this like former East Germany, which was very heavily industrialized under communism. And of course, with the 90s, a lot of the industry just kind of like went away. Nothing really came to replace it. I mean, I think that's part of the, I guess, the malaise that is happening there. But it's basically about this young man, Florian Herscht, who grew up as an orphan. It's not clear what happened with his parents, but he's sort of taken in by this figure who's only known as the boss. And it emerges that the boss is this like major neo-Nazi who at the same time has this incredible passion for the work of Johann Sebastian Bach. That's like one of the funniest things in the book. Um, and at the same time, Florian is very deeply connected to this former physics teacher, Herr Köhler, who now runs his own little weather station out of his backyard. I mean, all of this is just like it's so like German. It's like not even it's not even like it's so unreal like how German it is. So yeah, and it's about really like this trio of figures and how they interact. And I was really, to me, this is one of Laszlo's most moving books. I think there's really a lot of love in it, actually, that even, there's even a lot of love between this neo-Nazi and Florian. He kind of takes Florian under his wing. He sort of like helps him and exploits him at the same time. So it's really about this triad of figures and sort of what happens to them, and also sort of in the overall geopolitical situation of East Germany, which, and I have to say, I mean, like with a lot of Laszlo's work, it's just the timeliness is just really phenomenal, actually. That I think just even, right before, right around when he published it, just the AfD, just they were just like swept to power in the elections there. So it's almost uncanny how he's able to kind of sense something in the zeitgeist or just something in the air of just how things are developing. And of course, I mean,
So
it's not just Germany, it's really all of Europe actually, because there's this kind of like, even this kind of this resurgence that's happening all over Europe right now, in fact.
yeah, we've done some shows about kind of the rise of populism in various parts of the world and have done some of that talking about Europe as well. But it's been a while. But I think that and it's just so interesting to hear you talking about him because I think in part, I'm flattening the American audience necessarily for what I'm about to say, but I think Americans when they read about for example, the Nobel Prize, and they think, oh, the writer is from this country. They think, oh, I should go read that writer and then I'll learn about that country, right? And actually his aesthetic and political interests are so much more expansive than that. You were mentioning, I think you referenced something about, he has this expansive interest in and spent a lot of time in Asia. And here you've got sort of this book that is not set in Hungary. And I was thinking about when I was reading Herscht when I was a young pianist, which I was, by the way, very bad at. The thing I hated most of all was memorizing Bach, because Bach, for those of our listeners who don't know, like Bach, like the like line runs in like a continuous stream, almost like stream of consciousness. And to memorize it, you have to break it up into unnatural sections and practice. And so you have to
Well,
pause where you're
that would be what you would have to do. I would just
you would have
play
no
it
problem,
the
no
way it
doubt.
sounds.
But in order to memorize it, you have to, because it's this continuous stream, kind of like Laszlo's sentences, right? And you're talking about it's interesting to hear that he delivers one-liners in person, because one of the things that Herscht has is, of course, like this phenomenally long sentence, like these clauses upon clauses upon clauses. And I can just imagine that, like, syntactically, that would be beyond the question of like whether it mirrors Bach or not. Like, it just would be such a beast to translate. um and it's
Yeah,
like one of the
actually,
very distinctive things about his work. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, just that he himself is actually like he's a very accomplished musician. I think he
Right.
has like a home in Hungary, near the Danube River outside of Budapest. But he has a flat elsewhere, I think in Trieste, as far as I know. So he mainly stays like outside of Hungary, which I can fully understand. But he does have a collection of musical instruments there, and he understands music on a very, very deep level. So, for example, even if you go back to the Melancholy of Resistance, I think there's all this stuff about the tuning of the well-tempered clavier, and just like a lot of, like, just not even like a lot of really deep academic stuff about it. Um, and so I do feel, one of the things I was going to say in one of the questions about his sentences is that I do feel that the idea of music is really key to understanding the flow of his sentences. I feel that he played in a band when he was in high school. I think in the Hungarian press, just some article he's from Dula on the Romanian border. Uh, this article about him playing in this like rock band when he was like 50. Came up. So he's been involved with music for like a really, really long time. And yeah, I think that the idea of music and the idea of there not really being any discrete events, is like very key to understanding the repetition of certain motifs. So like I'm not a musician, so I don't understand it on such a deep level. But I think it's key though to really comprehending his sentences, and that these sudden shifts, these sort of tonal shifts that occur in his work, that occurred a lot in Herscht. There would suddenly just be this tonal shift. So I was really trying to think of it just in terms of like the idea of music, like the flow of music, actually, and that there's this, for me, the sentence of Herscht really, it it had a lot of internal momentum. I felt that it had a lot of velocity. He also writes about velocity. It's interesting that in other pieces that are more abstract, he writes about velocity and also about directions, which I find to be really fascinating. So I feel in this case, the direction of the sentence was very forward moving. So I wanted, it felt important to me to keep the momentum. For example, in Seobo, there was one chapter about Alhambra, in which the sentences were just really deeply, very, very complicated. It was very clear to me that because he was writing about the crystalline structure and these like repeating and non-repeating crystals, and the theories of Roger Penrose in the Alhambra, as it applies to the the tile decorations in the Alhambra. And it was clear to me that in his sentences, he was kind of replicating this crystalline pattern. So that was really quite difficult and very complicated. Whereas in Hersch, to me, it was just more of a forward movement. So for me, it was much more about just maintaining this forward momentum.
So for our listeners who haven't yet had the pleasure of reading Herscht, this is a show about literature in the news, and one of the things that Herscht does is to write to Angela Merkel. So like that appears on the first page. So that's part of the conceit that's maybe of particular interest to our listeners.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part, but yeah, because he's writing to Chancellor Merkel because he's convinced the world is about that somehow like the Big Bang is going to be reversed and the whole thing is going to disappear.
Yeah, speaking about, if there's a lot of physics in the book. I mean, that's what he's studying with his buddy, the guy who's got the weather station. And I just want to say the title and the numbers at the end come from his postal district. So that's how he sends the letter off, with just his last name and his postal district, to the chancellor, figuring she'll be able to find him and send her letter back if she needs to. Which, so in a way, the title of the book is a joke, I think, in its own way.
Yeah, actually, what's interesting is that the because he really, he really immerses himself. For example, before he wrote Satan Tango in the 80s, he was like he basically came from this middle class family, and I think maybe one of his parents was a lawyer or something. And he just took these like really low paying jobs because it's important to know that in Hungary, the social stratification is so extreme, actually, the discrepancy between the poor and the wealthy. And I would say this was something that, in a way, communism corrected it to a certain degree, but not really. So he really spent a lot of time in this sort of like very non-privileged social strata, and that's a lot of where Satan Tango came from. So just as here, this town in Herscht is actually modeled on a genuine East German town, and the postal code, I think, the postal code is from a district in Spain, but yeah, it's Kala in East Germany, and a lot of, for example, when he names the neo-Nazis, a lot of them are either genuine neo-Nazis or he just like changed one letter, actually. So there's a lot of kind of almost like documentary material in it as well. The house where the neo-Nazis were hanging out, where he refers to as the Berg, like that really existed actually in this town. It really was like a fascist hangout. And now the city council owns it, and I think they're just trying to decide what to do with it. Crazy.
What does the city
It's
council
gonna
do
be
with the
like
old
a
fascist
children's
hangout?
library or something. What?
Oh my God.
No,
Okay.
it's just great. It's crazy, you know. Because actually, when I was going over the edits, and at one point, there's this whole list of names of like Nazis. And so my wonderful editor at New Directions, Declan Spring, just wrote a note like, well, I couldn't find all these guys. And I said, yeah, well, I spoke to Laszlo, and I said, like, where did you get these names? And he said, well, when I was talking to this German cop, and I asked him, like, who are the Nazis around here? Like, he does serious research. But some of the names were changed slightly, not a lot, but like some of them are still doing time for murder. So I can understand like why he didn't want to name them precisely.
So you've known him since before. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about like what it's like to be a writer in Europe, and particularly, I mean, in Eastern Europe, I don't know that much about, but I know what it's like to be a writer in France. It's very different than in America. There's sort of, I guess maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like particularly like, high end, someone like Stephen King or someone, like they're like celebrities in America. And I feel like writers sort of blend in a little bit more in Europe. Maybe I'm wrong about that, or they aren't treated as celebrities in the same way that Americans do celebrity. Am I wrong? I mean, like, is his life going to massively change now that he's won the Nobel Prize? Like in terms of, the way people pay attention to him, obviously think about and read his work. Has he been relatively under the radar, or was he pretty well known in Europe prior to winning the prize?
Yeah, I think in Europe, specifically, he's obviously very, very well known in Hungary, actually.
Right.
And he's very beloved by a certain, I would say, the segment of the reading public that likes serious literature. I would say it also really differs from country to country. Like where I live in the Czech Republic, there's I have sort of like come across famous writers, and they pretty much, they're just like, oh, I'm just here like anyone else. I think that probably in Hungary, for a variety of reasons, Laszlo would like need to keep his privacy. Also because he's spoken out very firmly against the Orbán regime. And I don't know if you saw the short story that he published in the Yale Review recently that was translated by John Batke. And there was an interview with Hari Kunzuru, and he basically, Laszlo described the current Hungarian regime as a psychiatric case. I can't disagree
Well,
with
and he
him.
also
But
he also responded to, didn't Orbán tweet about congratulating him, and he said thanks, but no thanks, basically.
okay, actually, that wasn't actually his official Twitter account. That
Oh,
was like
okay.
somebody. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately,
So
that's not
that was
really
another
him.
piece of fake bullshit on X.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
yeah.
fine.
But
Just
he
that's the
did
only thing that's there.
actually. If you go on Facebook, though, it's really worth it. He actually put something on Facebook. Okay, there was like, should probably just back up a bit because Orbán, since he came into power, has been pursuing this Kulturkampf in Hungary. So, for example, there's this like wonderful literary culture that I was talking about that just tends to be very Western leaning, very influenced by European avant-gardes. I would say to a certain degree philo-Semitic. Um, but they're the ones who've actually produced like the most important literature over the last 100 years. And I'm not saying this with a judgment, but I just think like objectively, they're just really the ones who, the sort of people who came from this one tendency. So a lot of Orban's Kulturkampf is somehow like, how can I undo this? He's trying to like bring in this like substitute canon. But the major problem is that like most of these people don't really write that well. So it's kind of been a joke lately, like the people who are winning like the big literary like government prizes, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the person, this is also, he recently just stepped down from this position, but somebody, the guy who was like in charge, he was like the literature czar of Hungary, you could say, of Budapest or of Hungary. Somebody, he wrote something on Facebook saying that, well, somebody came up to him and said, well, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, like there was no picture of Krasznahorkai anywhere. And somebody came up to him and he said, well, why, like, and as you know, the Frankfurt Book Fair, they put like a giant, like lead sign, like a picture of Laszlo outside of the book fair. And so this guy wrote something like, well, we didn't have any pictures of Krasznahorkai at our stand, at the Hungarian stand, because like we're not living in a dictatorship and blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is how they speak. They're always very manipulative. They're incredibly manipulative. So anyway, sort of became a joke online, obviously. So somebody in Dula, I don't think it was Laszlo, but somebody in Dula, also Dula, like the government of Dula, they did like his hometown, nobody put up a sign or anything. So somebody in this tiny town of Dula, they put up like a little sheet of paper in their window that says, "In this house, we are proud that Krasznahorkai has won the Nobel Prize." So Laszlo put that on Facebook and he said, "Oh, I'm really grateful even for this like A4 sheet of paper." That's what I mean when I say that he's absolutely hilarious. But this is just it shows you like how everything there, every debate there is just so kind of like wrenched into this absurdist distortion, as it were. So I would say that yeah, I mean, on the reading public, he's like very well known, obviously instantly recognized. Um, and for the government, he's kind of like this anti-hero, even though Orban congratulated him, they don't support the kind of literature he writes. They don't support writers who are independent thinkers. And I should probably mention that a really important part of my translation of my formation as a translator has been working at the Hungarian Translators House. It's a residence in Balatonfüred in Hungary. And that's like I worked on all of Laszlo's books there. And they do not support this translators house either. So, if they really were happy about it, if they really wanted to do something, like it's right there. So, yeah, Orban congratulated him, but in terms of its deeds, the government has been very much trying to push Hungarian literature, I would say, in a kind of opposite direction. And I don't really think they've been successful, I have to say.
Okay, well, speaking about the political content of his work, here's a quote from The Guardian reviewing Herscht. Quote, the decomposition of the body politic may be Krasznahorkai's central preoccupation. All his novels are imbued with a premonition of the end of things. Susan Sontag, an early reader, anointed Krasznahorkai the contemporary master of the apocalypse. What do you think about this take? Do you agree with that? And what do you have to tell us about his fascination with the decomposition of the body politic?
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's interesting in terms of Susan Sontag that because I think she passed like what 2004 or something, that she basically only had a chance to read his first three books, which is kind of yeah, she sort of she saw the beginning of his oeuvre, and I think obviously she saw that he's a really, really important writer. But I think it's important also to look at how he thinks about the apocalypse, and what has said about it, some of his thoughts about it. And actually, Laszlo has spoken about the apocalypse as actually, again, this idea of the longue durée, of continuity, of continuation. He speaks of it as an ongoing process in time, almost something without a beginning or an end. And I think from what he has said, he feels that like we're kind of in it already, something that's already going on. So he, again, for him, it's not a discrete event. I mean, in terms of, I think anyone raised in Western culture, that we have this like idea of the apocalypse from the Bible or the four horsemen in the sky or whatever. There's something that sort of happens as an act of the vengeance of God or whatever. But I think he sees it very differently. I also just wanted to mention that I think also in terms of apocalypse, just as much, I think that the idea of the periphery is really, really important in his work. Um, as I said, his work stems from the periphery, that he comes from this border town, this tiny border town on the border with Romania. So if you think of like Hungary as kind of a periphery, he came from the periphery of the periphery. He went into these very peripheral spaces, these very marginalized spaces as a young man working in these like very grunt jobs, low wage jobs, very low prestige jobs. Um, so and I think this whole idea of sort of like that Eastern Europe itself is a periphery, you know, on the periphery of Europe, always on the periphery of empire, the periphery of the Habsburg Empire, the periphery of the Ottoman Empire before that, and now the periphery of the EU. And I think that also that periphery is not only a geographical concept, but it's also a chronological concept. So, in other words, his first novel, for example, Satan Tango, was published in 1985, and this was like right at the end of the Kadar era. János Kadar was the ruler of Hungary from after 1950, the crushed revolution of 1956 up until 1989. And at that time, I think that people in the center in Budapest felt that things were going to change, but nobody knew quite how they were going to change. Nobody really suspected the immensity of what was coming. But again, you know, for people outside of the center, things were very different. So yeah, I think that he also he depicts he tends to depict, I would say, a microcosm of society, not really this entire society, but he'll focus on a few archetypes within this sort of disintegrating cosmos in which the characters themselves don't really realize that it's disintegrating yet. And that, of course, he has like a few repeating archetypes. There's usually someone who's the archivist or the observer. For example, in Herscht, that would be Herr, who is like always recording the weather. You know, he's always recording the air, you know, like the mood of the place. As you could see it metaphorically, he's recording like the mood of this tiny town. And he's also a chronicler. Then there's usually a holy fool and a demon. And for example, in Hersch, that would be Florian. And then there's sometimes there are these characters who like overlap with each other. For example, the holy fool and the demon. You could say that Florian is a bit of each. So in a way, also, I mean, to me, these archetypes also do kind of fit into this biblical idea of apocalypse, this apocalyptic scene with these like characters wandering around. But at the same time, I feel that for me, his work seems just increasingly relevant as I think just like so many more people in the world just face more immiseration, just more devastation from climate change. And You know, I think that he's sort of describing something like a basic human condition, really.
So I would love for you to read to us a little bit from Herscht, the book that we have been kind of focusing on here. There's a section for those of our listeners who are maybe picking this up with us. There's a spot on page 46, kind of partway down the page. And Ottilie, I wonder if you would read that for us.
Oh, of course, I'd be happy to. It could ensue even in the next moment. He could not see into the subatomic world. How could he? But this world had nonetheless revealed itself to the mind, and it had betrayed that inasmuch as it is true that something arises from nothing, it can also occur that after the emergence from nothing of 1 billion antiparticles along with 1 billion particles, the one surplus material particle does not appear, as presumably occurred during the Big Bang, as stated by Hercule, but instead, due to a diabolical breaking of symmetry in the usually balanced emergence of particles and antiparticles, there could suddenly arise in one horrific moment one surplus antiparticle. And while the 1 billion particles and the 1 billion antiparticles are busy annihilating each other, and the 1 billion well-known 1 billion photons are floating away, the remaining single surplus antiparticle could be creating a new reality, an antiverse, the lethal mirror image of reality. And of course, this numeral, this 1 billion, only indicates a ratio that occurred among the emergence of these particles. It could occur just as incomprehensibly, resulting in the birth of a reality composed of antimatter. And what this means for us is Florian had decided to say this much and nothing more the previous night when he'd had enough of tossing and turning and left the train tracks 1 hour early. What this means for us here is catastrophe, not merely on this earth, but merely in our own galaxy, but for in the entire universe. Because if the universe of matter collides with this universe of antimatter, then, in Florian's estimation, both would be immediately annihilated, meaning that the something would disappear, and that which bears the opposing sign would not remain, or, as Hercule might phrase it, the anti-something with its opposite charge would not remain, meaning the supervention of nothing for us. Everything in the universe would return to where we started out, to that deathly light, which for us is identical with nothing. In vain is the existence of this nothing disputed. The very first geniuses of civilization trembled from the mere thought of this nothing. But we do not have to tremble. We must face the facts, face the great dialogue between something and nothing. Something must be done.
Thank you so much. I
So I
would
don't know. I think
love,
for me, there's like a lot of humor in that, with just like the 1 billion particles and the 1 billion antiparticles. It's like, I mean, it's obviously it's like serious physics, but it's also absurdist. You know, he knows how to. He just pushes it to this level of absurdity. Like I found it really funny when I was translating it.
I mean, and there's something also just so recognizable about the catastrophizing, which at least in my house is sometimes going on lately, where I'm like, is that real catastrophe? Is that actual catastrophe? Am I making it up? And yeah,
The
I
way I
also
read
just,
that passage, I don't know if this is how you guys read it, but to me it's like he's obsessed with this weird catastrophe when he's actually involved in an actual catastrophe dealing with the breakdown of the political system and being friends with Nazis in Germany. Like that's the real problem, but it's projected out into this abstraction, you know. Anyway.
yeah, and the sentence of it like accumulates in this like wild way where it is, I mean, I can sort of like, right, especially hearing you read it aloud, like it is this sort of like this music distracting him from the actual problem at hand. And I wonder if you could just walk us through some of your process when translating, like how do you try to capture the heart of the text in a way that will make sense linguistically to readers or speakers of other languages, or are you trying to, like, Hungarian syntactically is capable of things that English is not, maybe. I
Yeah,
mean, I say
yeah,
this
yeah,
presumptuously
and Hungarian writers really use that too, actually, and of course, even they have to, and they just have like just an incredible repertoire at their fingertips, actually. But in terms of yeah, as I was saying, I really tried to keep the momentum, which also in a passage like this, I mean, in the other passages where there's just like he's describing action or thinking, or there's interaction between two different characters, for example, Florian and the boss. But in passages like this, there's suddenly the prose became much more complex with a lot more scientific detail. And it's not just even it's scientific, it's also philosophical, where he's talking about the something and the nothing. Um, so I try to, yeah, I try to keep the momentum of it and just really convey everything. One thing I should say is that I never put in full stops where Krasznahorkai didn't put them in. I think that's very important. Um, and I think it's important just to try to keep the flow, just to like keep that momentum going forward and forward. And I usually, after I've done a few rough drafts, I read it to myself, or I actually read this suggestion online once, and I even like I turn on the reader, the automatic reader in Microsoft Word. I turn it on to the British voice, which sounds a bit better. And I'll actually also just listen to the reader, reading it. That also can be helpful. Um, but I think, yeah, just the idea that there are these repeating motifs is really important. And then suddenly there's like all this, you know, theoretical concerns, and then suddenly, we're talking about Florian tossing and turning in the bed, this very sort of down to earth detail, and then suddenly we're talking about like the end of the whole universe. So, I think another thing I have to mention is really my editor at New Directions, Declan Spring, who's just it's really fantastic to work with him. I've worked with him on all of my Laszlo books, except for the first one, Animal Inside, in which Dan Gunn at the University of Paris was the editor. But yeah, I think because obviously the in UK and US publishing, the editor like plays an extremely important role in translations. And so the interaction, the relationship between the translation and the editor is so crucial. Um, and that because Hungarian is syntactically so different, and because you can do all the stuff very easily that you can't necessarily do in English. For example, like such a long sentence in Hungarian, it doesn't come across as strange or odd. I mean, maybe, okay, so not every, like, they're not all writing 400-page sentences, but for example, in like, there's a way in which his writing is also, especially Herscht, it's like incredibly conversational because, just, you just engaging in Hungarian, or just people like listening to debates on YouTube or something, you will hear like really, really long sentences. And so it's also very important to have an editor that can, I would say, like receive the strangeness. I think that sometimes an English language editor might feel an impulse to kind of normalize the text, as it were. I've come across that occasionally, but I have to say Declan is just absolutely wonderful and absolutely perfect because he's able to work with me when something just isn't quite coming across the way I want it to, but at the same time, he's able to, accept the text as it is, in its strangeness, I would say.
Well, talking about the text as it is, and this is going to have to be our last question because we are running out of time. But as I told you before, my students, this episode, and getting in touch with you is the idea of students in a podcasting class that I'm teaching, and they wanted me to ask you, us to ask you, what do you consider yourself a translator who translates indirectly, getting at the idea like of what the sentence are supposed to mean, or do you go word for word? How does your translation process work?
Yeah, I would say I really you can't really go word for word in Hungarian because the sentence order is completely different. The syntax is completely different. There are times where I try to really feel what is behind the text, and like to convey everything informationally that is in the text, but somehow also to convey, I guess, the associations and the overtones. There'll be so many different overtones as well, just talking about music again, going on in any given text. So yeah, yeah, I think yeah, I mean, of course, there'll be associations that not every association will be clear to an American reader, but at the same time, there might be other ways you can try to get it across. So, yeah.
Ottilie, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, no
Listeners,
problem.
you can find Herscht 07769 by László Krasznahorkai, translated by Ottilie, at your local independent bookstore. And we encourage you to look for Ottilie's forthcoming translated works too, including Under a Pannonian Sky, 10 Women Poets from Hungary, and Edina Svoren's Funeral and Other Stories coming out in 2026.